A poor girl, frustrated with her ex, kisses a stranger without knowing he's a millionaire. What he did next will surprise you. Before we start the story, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Lucy Cooper's day was already off to a bad start. First, her breakfast was ruined by a crazy pigeon. Then, her eccentric boss made her rewrite an entire article because the commas were all wrong, when in reality, it was just a smudge on her boss's glasses. But nothing. Compared to seeing her ex-boyfriend standing there in that fancy jewelry store buying an engagement ring. "Oh no," she mumbled, trying to hide behind a necklace display. But it was too late. Ryan Carter, the same guy who broke up with her 3 months ago, saying relationships are just a trap of the capitalist system, was right there, holding the hand of an outrageously beautiful woman and slipping a ridiculously expensive ring onto her finger. "Do you like this one, my love?" he asked in a sweet voice Lucy had never heard before. Her stomach turned. The woman let out a sugary giggle, showing off a diamond the size of a satellite. "It's gorgeous, darling. I can't wait to be the future Mrs. Carter." Lucy nearly stumbled backward. She was officially in meltdown mode, and to make things worse, Ryan saw her. For a few seconds, Lucy felt like her soul had left her body. She wished the ground would just swallow her whole. Ryan looked at her with that smug smile that screamed, "I moved on first." "Lucy? Great." She forced a smile, turned slowly, and met Ryan's surprised gaze. "Ryan!" she exclaimed, faking enthusiasm. "Wow, what an unexpected and totally not uncomfortable surprise." "You still live here?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, as if she were some relic of the past that should have vanished by now. "And you still breathe?" Lucy shot back, crossing her arms. Samantha let out a fake little laugh and clung to Ryan's arm possessively. "Oh wow, Lucy, you look exactly the same," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "It's like time hasn't passed at all, right?" Lucy felt her brain boiling with anger. "And you look more artificial. What happened? Did your Instagram filter leak into real life?" Samantha clenched her jaw. Ryan cleared his throat as if trying to put an end to the passive-aggressive showdown. "So, are you dating anyone?" Lucy froze. "Excuse me?" He really wanted to know if she was single. Was he trying to confirm his victory? Like she was still crying in her room, eating ice cream, and listening to Adele? And even worse, Samantha leaned in with a smug smile. "Oh, Lucy, you're single, aren't you? But don't worry, there's still time. Some people find love after 40. That was it. Her patience was gone. Before Lucy could fire back, she suddenly felt a strong arm wrap around her shoulders. "Hey, sweetheart." Lucy froze. The deep, steady, and ridiculously smooth voice sounded right next to her ear. Before her brain could process what was happening, she felt a warm hand rest on her shoulder, holding her so naturally that it seemed like they were a real couple. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. Have you been waiting long?" Ryan and Samantha turned pale. Lucy didn't think. She just acted. Before logic could intervene, she turned around and kissed him. It was a reckless kiss. A desperate kiss. A kiss purely for survival. And the worst part, the stranger kissed her back. Not in surprise, but with absolute calm. Lucy heard Samantha gasp and Ryan clench his jaw. Perfect. Mission accomplished. When she finally pulled away, Lucy turned to face them with a smug smile. "So what were you asking again?" Ryan looked like he had just swallowed a frog. Samantha was gripping his arm like she was about to explode. And then, as if the chaos Lucy had just created wasn't enough, the stranger took it a step further. "Shall we go, darling?" he said, a playful smile on his lips. "We still need to pick out that wedding ring." Lucy nearly choked. Who is this guy? Wedding? Before she could react, he was already leading her away. And that was the moment she realized the monumental mistake she had just made. She hadn't just kissed some random stranger. She had kissed Nicholas Scott, the wealthiest, most powerful, and most untouchable billionaire in the city. And worse, he seemed to be enjoying it. Lucy had made plenty of mistakes in her life, dyeing her hair green as a teenager, buying tight shoes just because they were on sale, drunk texting her ex, but kissing a total stranger in the middle of a mall? This was a new record. And now, she was being kidnapped by him. Well, maybe kidnapped was an exaggeration, but Nicholas Scott was pulling her through the mall like they had been together for years. Lucy tried to ignore the fact that people were staring. Of course, they were staring. He was ridiculously handsome, and she was wearing a t-shirt with an angry unicorn on it. The contrast between them was so absurd that anyone would think he had hired her as a background extra. "Wait." Lucy planted her feet firmly on the ground, forcing him to stop. "What just happened?" Nicholas tilted his head, clearly amused. Apparently you kissed me. And you kissed me back. Of course, it would have been rude not to. Lucy blinked. Rude? You say that like it was a wedding toast, he smirked. Wasn't it? It was not. Then we need to work on our performance. Lucy felt her soul leaving her body. For the love of God, who are you? Nicholas raised an eyebrow. You really don't know? Lucy frowned. Should I? This is fascinating. This is terrifying. Nicholas gave an irritating little smile. No need to thank me for the rescue. Lucy stared at him in disbelief. Rescue? I didn't ask for help. Your ex was treating you like an old, worn-out shoe. Did you really want me to just stand there? Lucy opened her mouth. Dang it. He had a point, but she wasn't about to admit that. Great. Now that you've done your heroic deed, we can move on with our lives. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Not even a thank you? Should I send you a card that says, thank you for making my life even more complicated? Nicholas smirked. A dinner will do. Lucy blinked. What? You owe me dinner. She let out an incredulous laugh. I owe you? You're the one who kissed me. On impulse. Let's call it a compensatory impulse then. Lucy crossed her arms. And if I say no, Nicholas shrugged, I'll tell your ex that we're madly in love. Lucy choked on her own breath. You wouldn't dare. Want to test me? Lucy shut her eyes and tried to think of a way out of this mess. Unfortunately, she couldn't find one. Fine. One dinner. Nicholas smiled. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 8. Lucy pointed a finger at him. If this is some billionaire human sacrifice scheme, I want a lawyer. Nicholas chuckled. You'll survive. Lucy wasn't so sure about that. Hours later, Lucy was staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. What am I doing? She was about to have dinner with a man she kissed without even knowing who he was. This wasn't a date. This was a cry for therapy. But since there was no way out, Lucy grabbed her purse and went to face her fate. The restaurant was so fancy that Lucy felt like she should be wearing a crown. The waiter looked at her as if he already knew her bank account was about to suffer. If you need a kidney, I can donate one after dinner, she muttered to Nicholas. He smiled. I've got it covered. In that case, I'll have a plate made of gold and a diamond-studded glass. Nicholas let out a quiet laugh. They sat down, and Lucy tried to ignore how comfortable he looked. So Lucy, he leaned his elbow on the table. Tell me about yourself. Lucy raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I like knowing who I'm having dinner with. Lucy crossed her arms. I work, pay bills, and occasionally kiss strangers to escape ex-boyfriends. Nicholas smiled. Fascinating. Is that a natural talent or self-taught? Sadly, there's no technical course for it. That's a shame. I'd enroll. Lucy rolled her eyes. And what about you? What do you do besides being an irritating billionaire? I manipulate situations to my advantage, Lucy scoffed. Yeah, I've noticed, Nicholas shrugged. And yet, here you are having dinner with me. Lucy stared at her glass of wine. I didn't have a choice, Nicholas chuckled. She hated to admit it, but she was actually having fun. And then he dropped the bombshell. I have a proposal, Lucy frowned. If it involves anything illegal, I'm out. Nicholas smiled. Stay with me for a month. Lucy spit out her water. What? You heard me. I knew it. This is a human sacrifice. Not at all. I just need you to pretend to be my girlfriend. Lucy stared at him. Why? Nicholas swirled his wine glass. Let's just say some people need to believe it. Lucy raised an eyebrow. And I'm the best choice? After that kiss? No doubt. Lucy felt her face heat up. And what do I get out of this? Nicholas smiled. Whatever you want. Lucy bit her lip. This was the most absurd idea in the world. But it could be fun. Lucy was fully aware that impulsive decisions had never been her strength. She was the type to take half an hour to pick an ice cream flavor. The type to take days deciding whether to buy a new outfit. But here she was, sitting across from Nicholas Scott, the richest man in town, seriously considering a fake dating contract. She looked at him, completely at ease, as if he were closing a big business deal. Lucy still wasn't sure if this was some bizarre dream or a huge mistake about to happen. Let me get this straight. She tilted her head. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend for a month. In exchange, I can ask for whatever I want. Nicholas nodded with a half smile. Exactly. Lucy narrowed her eyes. And why me? You could hire a professional actress, a model, someone with a little more class and a little fewer unicorns on their shirt. Nicholas glanced at her t-shirt and smirked. The unicorn has personality. I respect that. Lucy rolled her eyes. Focus, Nicholas. Why me? He leaned in slightly. Because you didn't know who I was. Lucy blinked. What does that have to do with anything? You kissed me without knowing who I am. That was an accident. A great accident. Lucy let out a long sigh. You still haven't explained why all of this is necessary. Nicholas swirled his wine glass between his fingers, as if carefully choosing his words. Let's just say my family has certain expectations, and a very important event is coming up. If I show up single, it's going to be a problem. Lucy crossed her arms. What kind of problem? The kind that involves a million questions, an attempted arranged marriage, and possibly a documentary about my love life. Lucy tried not to laugh. They're really that intense? You have no idea. Lucy fell silent for a moment. What he was asking wasn't that crazy. In fact, it was kind of funny. And if she thought about it, there were a few perks for her too. For example, Ryan would see that she had moved on. She'd get a taste of what it was like to live in the world of millionaires. And if things got unbearable, she could just walk away. Nicholas seemed to notice her internal dilemma and smiled. You're thinking about saying yes, aren't you? Lucy frowned. Don't put words in my mouth. I don't have to. I already know your negotiation style. She narrowed her eyes at him. And what's my style? First, you make a dramatic scene, then you pretend you're not interested. But deep down, you're way too curious to turn it down. Lucy's mouth fell open in shock. That's not true. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. No? Then say no and walk away. Lucy closed her mouth. Darn it, he got her. She looked away, thinking, Nicholas was right about the curiosity. After all, when else would she get a chance to see what life was really like in the billionaire world? Lucy took a deep breath. Okay, I'm in, but I have conditions, Nicholas smiled. Of course you do. Lucy held up a finger. First, I'm not your employee. I won't take orders from you. I never thought following orders was your strong suit. Good. Second, I want something in return. Nicholas crossed his arms, intrigued. What is it? Lucy smiled. I want you to help me get a better job. Nicholas blinked, surprised. You want a job? Yes, I'm tired of my current one. If I'm going along with this crazy plan, I want something useful in return. Nicholas seemed to think it over. Then he held out his hand. Deal. Lucy stared at his hand for a moment. She knew she was about to step into something completely outside her comfort zone, but you know what? Why not? She shook his hand. Deal. Nicholas grinned. Welcome to my world, Lucy. The next morning, Lucy woke up to a message on her phone. Nicholas, I'll pick you up at 10. Wear something comfortable. Lucy frowned. Comfortable for what? She had no idea what to expect, but she doubted he was taking her on a picnic. And she was right. Because at exactly 10 a.m., Nicholas pulled up in front of her house in a car that probably cost more than the entire house. Lucy looked at the car, then at him. Seriously? Isn't this a little much? Nothing is too much when you have style. Lucy rolled her eyes and got in. So where are we going? Nicholas gave her a mysterious smile. You'll see. Lucy didn't like surprises. But apparently, Nicholas loved mystery. And when they arrived at their destination, she understood why. They were at a luxury boutique. Lucy looked around, confused. What are we doing here? Nicholas held the door open for her. If you're going to be my girlfriend, you need to dress the part. Lucy froze. Wait a second. Are you saying my clothes aren't good enough? Nicholas glanced at her unicorn t-shirt. I think your unicorn could use a little vacation. Lucy gasped, offended. This unicorn is a symbol of personality. Now it can be a symbol of retirement. Lucy huffed but stepped inside the store. And, half an hour later, she was surrounded by dresses that cost as much as her rent. She tried on a few, feeling like an imposter in the middle of all that luxury. But when she caught Nicholas watching her with a satisfied look, something shifted. He was really committed to this charade. And strangely, she was starting to find it all pretty amusing. Lucy was still trying to wrap her head around the fact that, for the next month, she would be Nicholas Scott's fake girlfriend. The whole situation felt like something out of a soap opera, where the main character gets caught up in a crazy deal, and suddenly, her life is turned upside down. And that was exactly how she felt right now, on her way to a high-society event, in a luxury car, sitting next to the most sought-after billionaire in town. She glanced at Nicholas, who was driving as calmly as if this were just another day for him. Unlike her, who felt her stomach twist at the thought of all the sophisticated people she was about to meet. He seemed immune to nerves, which only made her more anxious. Are you sure this is a good idea? Lucy asked, gripping the hem of the new dress he had bought for her. She still couldn't believe she was wearing something this expensive. If she spilled juice on it, she'd probably have to sell a kidney to pay for the damage. You already agreed to the deal, so there's no backing out now, Nicholas replied with an amused glance. Besides, you'll do great. Just smile, wave, and don't try to run away. Running away doesn't sound like such a bad idea. she muttered, crossing her arms. Remind me again how you convinced me to do this? I'm very persuasive, he said simply, keeping his eyes on the road. Lucy huffed but couldn't argue. He was persuasive, and almost impossible to refuse. When they arrived at the event, Lucy was sure she was in the wrong place. The ballroom was enormous, filled with well-dressed people holding champagne glasses and having conversations so refined she wouldn't even attempt to understand them. This was the kind of setting she'd only seen in magazines and movies. Definitely not something she was used to. Just stay by my side and act like you belong here, Nicholas whispered, taking her hand before stepping inside. Easy for you to say, she muttered, but let him lead her into the room. The reaction was immediate. The moment Nicholas entered, all eyes turned to him. Lucy could feel the curious stares on her, as if people were trying to figure out who the woman by his side was. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture. She had agreed to this, so she needed to act like it was completely normal. Nicholas. A woman's voice called out, and Lucy saw an elegant woman approaching. She wore a flawless dress and a charming smile, but her eyes were locked on Lucy, sizing her up from head to toe. Claire, it's so good to see you, Nicholas said, greeting her with a polite smile. I'd say the same, but I'm more surprised by your company. You never bring anyone to these events. Claire smiled, but there was a sharp curiosity in her voice. Who's your friend? Nicholas casually wrapped an arm around Lucy's waist, pulling her closer with ease. This is Lucy, my girlfriend, he announced in such a natural tone that Lucy almost laughed. If he was nervous about lying, he certainly didn't show it. Claire raised her eyebrows in surprise. Lucy simply smiled and extended her hand. Nice to meet you, she said, trying to sound confident. The pleasure is mine, Claire replied, shaking her hand with a curious look. No offense, but you don't seem like the kind of woman Nicholas usually brings along. Lucy gave a polite smile, but inside she wanted to ask exactly what that was supposed to mean. Well, I guess he decided to change things up a bit, she replied, keeping her composure. Nicholas let out a quiet chuckle beside her, clearly enjoying the exchange. Claire, however, kept her gaze on Lucy for a few more seconds before turning back to Nicholas. I hope she's ready for this world, darling. Not everyone can keep up with you. I think she's doing just fine so far. Nicholas replied without hesitation. Claire gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and walked away, most likely to spread the news to the other guests. Lucy let out a sigh and looked at Nicholas. I don't like her. Most people don't, he said casually. Lucy rolled her eyes. You could have warned me that these people are intense. You didn't ask, he replied with a playful smile. They spent the next hour making their way through the event, greeting people Lucy had never seen before and listening to conversations about investments, corporate mergers, and extravagant vacations. She did her best to look interested, but honestly, she was more focused on not tripping over her dress. Then, in the middle of the night, a familiar voice called from behind her. Lucy? She turned around and her stomach twisted. Ryan, the ex-boyfriend, at the same event. Because, of course, the universe loved making her life complicated. He stared at her with pure shock, as if he couldn't imagine that Lucy could be here. Samantha, clinging to his arm as always, looked just as stunned. What are you doing here? Ryan asked, still in disbelief. Before Lucy could respond, Nicholas slid an arm around her waist, giving a light squeeze as if preparing for battle. She's with me, Nicholas said, his voice firm but laced with amusement. I thought that was obvious. Ryan blinked, completely thrown off. Samantha looked like she was about to burst with curiosity. You two are together? Ryan asked, clearly trying to make sense of it. Lucy smiled, seizing the moment. Yes, we're together. Ryan opened and closed his mouth a few times, but no words came out. He glanced between Nicholas and Lucy, as if waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a joke. Since when? Samantha asked, crossing her arms. For a while now, Lucy replied, trying to sound casual. Ryan still looked stunned. Nicholas, on the other hand, seemed quite pleased with the situation. Well, it was nice seeing you, but we need to go, Nicholas said, gently pulling Lucy away. As they walked off, Lucy finally let out the breath she had been holding. I can't believe he was here, she muttered. An interesting coincidence, Nicholas said, glancing at her with amusement. And I must say, you handled it very well. I'm an excellent actress, she replied, trying to ignore how much her mind was spinning. He smiled. So are you ready to keep going with the plan? Lucy took a deep breath. The first challenge was behind her. Now, she just had to figure out if she could keep up this act without losing herself in it. Let's see where this goes, she said, finally relaxing. Nicholas smiled, as if he already knew the story was far from over. And deep down, Lucy knew it too. Lucy still wasn't sure how she had managed to get through the event without tripping over her dress or accidentally revealing something she shouldn't. But somehow, she had pulled it off. The real problem, however, was that now, sitting across from Nicholas Scott in one of the most luxurious offices she had ever seen, she realized this madness was just beginning. "So, let's make it official," Nicholas said, flipping through some papers with the ease of someone who did this every day. "Here's the contract outlining our agreement." Lucy narrowed her eyes at him. "Contract? You're joking, right?" Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Of course not. This is business, Lucy. You didn't think we'd just shake hands and hope for the best, did you?" She crossed her arms. "I kind of hoped it would be simpler." "Nothing involving my family is simple," he replied, sliding the papers across the table toward her. "Besides, the contract ensures that you won't be at a disadvantage." Lucy picked up the documents and started reading. Her eyes quickly scanned the clauses outlining each of their responsibilities. She was expected to accompany him to social events, maintain the story that they were a couple, and, most importantly, keep everything confidential. In return, Nicholas would secure her a new job and cover any expenses related to their arrangement. Wow. This feels like one of those movie contracts where the heroine ends up falling for the billionaire boss, Lucy murmured. Nicholas smiled. "If this were a movie, we'd already be halfway through the story," she rolled her eyes. "So, I just signed this, and for a month I'm officially your girlfriend?" "Exactly." Lucy bit her lip, thinking it over. "What happens if I want to back out halfway through?" "Then you let me know in advance, and we end things quietly," Nicholas replied. "But of course, it would be best to avoid that. After all, my family is expecting me to finally have a stable life." Lucy held back a laugh. "Stable life? You barely know me. My family doesn't need to know that." She sighed and looked at the contract again. She knew this was completely insane, but deep down, she didn't have much to lose. And on top of that, it would make for a great story someday. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the pen. "All right, let's do this." Nicholas smiled, satisfied, as she signed the paper. "Welcome to the agreement, Lucy." She handed him the document, feeling like she had just stepped into an entirely new world. The next few days passed faster than Lucy expected. At first, she thought pretending to be Nicholas's girlfriend would feel strange, but surprisingly, he made it seem natural. Their schedule was already packed with events, and to her surprise, she was starting to get used to the fast-paced rhythm of his world. That evening, Nicholas picked her up for yet another high-society charity event. This time, Lucy knew what to expect. Curious glances, subtle questions, and possibly some kind of provocation from people who knew him. But instead of feeling nervous, she was starting to understand how things worked. "You're getting good at this," Nicholas commented as he drove. "Thank you. I learned from the best," she replied, pretending to be proud. "I hope that wasn't sarcasm." "Just a little." Nicholas laughed, and Lucy realized that, despite how unusual this situation was, they were actually getting along. When they arrived at the event, they were greeted by photographers and guests who seemed more interested in the city's newest couple than in the actual charity cause. Lucy held her posture, remembering everything she had learned from previous events. Smile, nod, and avoid getting pulled into conversations that could complicate their story. But of course, since nothing in her life ever went smoothly, it didn't take long for the unexpected to happen. "Nicholas, darling." A woman's voice echoed through the room. Lucy turned and saw a woman approaching with a dazzling smile. She was tall, elegant, and clearly had known Nicholas for a long time. "Olivia," Nicholas greeted her, his expression polite but not particularly warm. Lucy knew instantly. She was an ex. Olivia gave Lucy a quick once-over before turning her attention back to Nicholas. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" Nicholas placed a hand on Lucy's waist, gently pulling her a little closer. "This is Lucy, my girlfriend." Olivia's eyes sparkled with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Girlfriend? You? That's unexpected." Lucy pressed her lips together, sensing that this conversation was about to get interesting. "Love is full of surprises," she replied with a smile. Nicholas held back a laugh while Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Well, Nicholas has never been easy to win over. You must be someone very special." Lucy blinked innocently. "He's actually easier than he seems. You just have to know which buttons to press." Nicholas cleared his throat beside her, clearly catching the hidden meaning. Olivia laughed, but Lucy could tell it wasn't entirely genuine. "Well, I hope you two are happy," Olivia said, still studying Lucy with interest. But if you ever need advice, just know I've been where you are." Lucy tilted her head slightly and smiled. "Thanks, but I think I'm doing just fine so far." Nicholas wrapped an arm around her and gave a small squeeze. "You definitely are," he said, ending the conversation before Olivia could continue. As soon as Olivia walked away, Lucy let out a breath. "Ex-girlfriend?" she asked, just to confirm. "Yes. Did things end well?" "Let's just say we have different views on what a relationship means." Lucy narrowed her eyes. "That's a very vague answer," Nicholas smiled. "And you asked too many questions." Lucy laughed and shook her head. No matter how much she tried to figure Nicholas out, he always had a way of dodging her questions. They spent the rest of the night attending events, and for the first time, Lucy realized she didn't feel out of place. What had started as a purely professional arrangement was beginning to feel comfortable, and that, to her, was a little scary. By the time they left the event and Nicholas drove her home, Lucy felt exhausted but oddly satisfied. She had never imagined she would adapt so quickly to a world so different from her own. Before stepping out of the car, she looked at Nicholas. "So, how long until your family stops doubting that we're a real couple?" He chuckled. "Probably never. But don't worry, we're doing just fine." Lucy nodded and reached for the door handle, but before she could step out, Nicholas called her name. "Lucy." She turned back. "What?" Nicholas hesitated for a second before smiling. "You're better at this than you think." Lucy felt something stir inside her, but she ignored it. "I'm amazing. You just took too long to notice." She winked at him and stepped out of the car, realizing that, for the first time in a long while, she was actually having fun. But what did that mean? She had no idea. And maybe she didn't want to know just yet. Lucy was starting to get used to the idea of being Nicholas Scott's fake girlfriend. Or at least, that's what she thought, until he told her that morning that they'd be having dinner with his family that night. "Dinner? With your family?" Lucy widened her eyes, holding her coffee cup as if her life depended on it. "You forgot to mention that little detail in the contract." "It wasn't in the contract, but it's part of the deal," Nicholas replied casually, while reviewing some documents. "That's not fair," she retorted, putting the cup down on the table. "You know I'm terrible at keeping up appearances. What if I say something wrong? What if your family figures out it's all a lie? Then just do what you do best," he said, not even looking up from the paper. "Improvise," Lucy sighed loudly. "That's easy for you to say. You were born into this world. I don't even know which fork to use at a formal dinner." Nicholas finally looked up and gave her a half smile. "Just follow my lead and everything will be fine." She crossed her arms, skeptical. "Are you sure about that?" "Absolutely," Lucy let out a long sigh. "This is going to go so wrong." When Lucy stepped into the grand hall of the Scott family home, her first instinct was to hold her breath. The mansion was so impressive that she felt she had to tread carefully so she wouldn't step on something absurdly expensive. The dining table was long and elegantly set, with plates that seemed more expensive than her rent. Nicholas's family was already gathered, and as they entered, all eyes turned toward her. Nicholas, a woman with a refined appearance and a warm smile, stood up. "You finally decided to visit us." "Mom," he greeted, kissing her on the cheek before turning to Lucy. "This is Lucy, my girlfriend." Lucy felt Nicholas's mom's gaze analyzing her. Then, to her surprise, the woman gave her a welcoming smile. "Lucy, dear, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Nicholas never introduces us to anyone. We were starting to think he planned to live alone forever." Lucy smiled nervously. "He finally realized he wouldn't be able to live without me," she joked, giving Nicholas a knowing look. He held back a laugh and casually placed a hand on her back. "Exactly. Well, sit down, sit down. Let's eat," Nicholas's mom said, gesturing to the seats at the table. Lucy sat next to Nicholas, and luckily the conversation started off easy. His mom asked questions about her life, her work, and how they had met. Lucy followed the plan, telling the story they had rehearsed. Everything was going surprisingly well, until the door to the hall opened and a man entered. Nicholas's expression immediately hardened. "Dad," he murmured, maintaining his posture. Lucy straightened in her seat. So that was his dad. A man with a strong presence, a serious look, and impeccable posture. He approached the table and greeted everyone before setting his eyes on her. "So this is Lucy," he said, sizing her up. "Yes," Nicholas replied firmly. "My girlfriend." The man didn't seem convinced. "Very interesting. You've always avoided serious relationships. And now, out of nowhere, you show up with someone." A silence settled for a few seconds. Lucy felt the weight of those words and knew that Nicholas's dad wasn't convinced by the act. "Love has its own timing," she said, offering a confident smile. Nicholas's mom smiled, clearly appreciating the response, but his dad kept his sharp gaze. And how did you two meet? Lucy opened her mouth to answer, but Nicholas was faster. In a bookstore, he said, surprising her. Lucy turned to him, confused, but he kept a calm expression. She was holding a book I wanted to buy. We both reached for it at the same time and started arguing over who should get it. Lucy understood the game right away and jumped in with her own improvised line. He tried to argue that he had seen it first, she said, rolling her eyes. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. So she challenged me to a coffee. Whoever convinced the other would get the book. Nicholas finished, giving her a knowing look. And who won? Nicholas's mom asked, amused. Me, obviously. Don't kid yourself, Nicholas retorted. I let you win. The whole table laughed, and even his dad seemed more relaxed. Lucy realized that, by some miracle, they had managed to convince everyone. Dinner went on more easily, with conversations about travel, work, and family events. Lucy tried her best to keep up and respond naturally. Slowly, she started to realize that, despite the initial nervousness, she was starting to enjoy Nicholas's mom's company and even his dad's direct way of speaking. When they finally said their goodbyes and left the mansion, Lucy let out a heavy sigh. I thought I was going to faint in there. Nicholas smiled. You did great. Your dad almost knocked me down with just a look. He's like that with everyone. Don't take it personally. Lucy looked at him, suspicious. Are you sure he bought it? Nicholas hesitated for a second before answering. He still has doubts, but for now we're doing fine. Lucy sighed. Great. So all we need to do now is keep up this act until the deal is done. Nicholas stayed silent for a moment, watching her. You think this will be easy? She smiled. Compared to today? Definitely. The problem was that Lucy still didn't know what was coming. And maybe things were about to get a lot more complicated than she thought. Lucy was still processing everything that happened at the Scott family dinner. She wasn't sure how, but she managed to make it out alive from that situation, without stuttering too much, and most impressively, without knocking anything over. But one thing was certain. Nicholas's dad didn't seem convinced. While they were in the car, heading home, Lucy glanced sideways at Nicholas, who was driving with a calm expression. He seemed satisfied with her performance, but Lucy still felt like they were walking on thin ice. Your dad didn't believe it, she said, breaking the silence. He has doubts, Nicholas corrected. But so far, he hasn't called us out. That's because he's waiting for the right moment, Lucy retorted, crossing her arms. Did you see the look in his eyes? He didn't buy that story for a second. Nicholas shrugged. He can be suspicious all he wants. The important thing is that, so far, we're still in the game. Lucy sighed. That doesn't comfort me. Nicholas gave her an amused look. I'm paying you to not worry. She stared at him. You're not paying me. I am, he said. With expensive clothes, fancy dinners, and an experience you'd never have in your life. Lucy narrowed her eyes. I still haven't decided if this experience is worth it. Oh, you're loving it. Lucy opened her mouth to retort but closed it again. The truth was, he wasn't entirely wrong. The next day, Lucy woke up to a flood of messages on her phone. She blinked a few times, confused, and when she opened the notifications, she almost dropped the phone. The first message was from a friend. Lucy, are you dating Nicholas Scott? The second, from another friend. How come you have a billionaire boyfriend and didn't tell anyone? The third, from an unknown number. Hello, we're from a magazine and would like to interview you about your relationship with Nicholas Scott. Lucy's eyes widened as she scrolled down. There were at least 15 more similar messages. What's going on? She murmured, still half asleep. It wasn't until she opened one of the links that she realized the gravity of the situation. There she was, on the cover of a gossip site, next to Nicholas. The photo was taken at dinner the night before while he held her waist and she smiled at someone in his family. Nicholas Scott finally confirms a relationship. Who is Lucy Cooper, the woman who won over the billionaire? Lucy let out a choked sound and threw the phone on the bed as if it were on fire. No, no, no! This wasn't part of the plan. Before she could panic, the phone started ringing. She looked at the screen, and of course, it was Nicholas. She took a deep breath before answering. Did you see this? She fired off before he could say anything. Good morning to you too, Nicholas replied, amused. And yes, I saw it. How did this happen? Reporters do that, he said as if it was no big deal. It's not like we were going to stay under the radar forever. But now everyone's talking about it. People are texting me. I even have magazine people asking for an interview. Nicholas sighed. Ignore it. It'll blow over in a few days. Lucy huffed. Do you really think it's going to be that simple? Of course. The media always finds a new story. She wasn't convinced, but at the moment, she didn't know what to do. This is going to cause problems. Only if you let it. Now, calm down. Are you ready for the event tonight? Lucy froze. What event? A gala dinner. You need to be ready by 7. Nicholas, you can't just throw this stuff at me. Of course I can. It's our contract. Lucy gritted her teeth. You love seeing me panic, don't you? I like seeing how you handle it. Lucy closed her eyes and took a deep breath. You're lucky I can't back out of this deal right now. I know, I'll see you at 7. Before she could protest, he hung up. Lucy stared at the phone. This man is going to drive me crazy. At exactly 7 o'clock, Nicholas showed up to pick her up. He was wearing a sharp suit and looked like he stepped straight out of a magazine. Lucy, on the other hand, was still adjusting her dress and trying not to trip over her own feet. You look beautiful, Nicholas said as soon as she got in the car. You're only saying that because you have to keep up appearances, she replied, fiddling with her earrings. What if I'm telling the truth? She looked at him. You never say anything without a reason, Nicholas. He smiled sideways. Smart. Lucy rolled her eyes. When they arrived at the event, she realized it was going to be much worse than she imagined. The place was packed with photographers and high society people who seemed ready to devour her with their eyes. Nicholas got out of the car and, before she could hesitate, took her hand and led her down the red carpet. Just smile, he whispered. Lucy kept a smile on her face, but her heart was racing. People were taking pictures, whispering, and she felt like she was in a movie. As soon as they entered the ballroom, Nicholas pulled her close. Breathe. She exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. This is too much. You'll get used to it. Lucy wasn't so sure about that. The night went on with greetings, smiles, and introductions. Lucy did her best to keep up, but she felt like she was in a play where she didn't know the script. Then, in the middle of the night, someone suddenly appeared and grabbed her arm. She turned, surprised, and came face to face with Samantha. You've got guts, the woman said with a not-so-friendly smile. Lucy blinked. Excuse me, what? Samantha crossed her arms. You think you're fooling anyone? That you're really with Nicholas? Lucy forced a smile. Are you jealous? Samantha laughed, but it wasn't a genuine laugh. I just find it strange. You were just an ordinary girl until recently. Now, you're here, acting like you belong in this world. Lucy felt irritation rising. And what's wrong with that? The problem is, I know this isn't real. Before Lucy could respond, Nicholas appeared by her side, placing a hand on her waist. Is there a problem? He asked calmly. Samantha flashed a fake smile. No, none at all. I was just talking to Lucy about how surprising it is to see her here. Nicholas smiled. Lucy always surprises me. That's why I like her so much. Lucy blinked, not sure how to react. Samantha narrowed her eyes but said nothing. When they finally walked away, Lucy looked at Nicholas. You did that on purpose. Did what? You knew she didn't believe. Nicholas shrugged. Now she has fewer reasons to doubt. Lucy shook her head. You like to play with people, don't you? Only when the game is worth it. Lucy wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a threat, but somehow she knew the situation was getting more complicated. And worst of all, she wasn't sure if she still wanted it to end. Lucy was still trying to process everything that had happened. The dinner with Nicholas's family, the articles popping up on gossip sites, and now, as if all of that wasn't enough, Samantha deciding she wanted to confront her directly. It felt like the universe was testing her patience. The gala was still going strong, with important guests mingling in the luxurious hall, and Lucy could feel every pair of eyes on her. But instead of feeling intimidated, Lucy decided she wouldn't give Samantha the satisfaction of seeing her uncomfortable. You don't have to react to her provocations, Nicholas said beside her, watching Samantha walk away. I know, Lucy replied, taking a glass of juice from a waiter's tray. But honestly, she needs a new hobby. Nicholas let out a small laugh and took a sip of his drink. I admit, I expected you to be more nervous about all this. Lucy sighed. Oh, I am nervous. But after surviving your dad's interrogation and seeing my face on gossip websites, nothing surprises me anymore. Well, then maybe you won't be surprised by what comes next, he said casually. Lucy stopped mid-sip and looked at him suspiciously. What did you do? I didn't do anything, he replied with that innocent tone she had learned to be wary of. But I think you should know that my mom liked you so much, she wants to organize a more intimate dinner for us. Lucy nearly choked. Another dinner? I barely survived the first one. Nicholas laughed. My mom is convinced she's finally found a woman who can handle me. Well, at this point, I'm starting to doubt my own sanity, He glanced at her sideways. You can still back out. Lucy scoffed. And give up the chance to keep pretending I'm a millionaire for a month? No way. Nicholas smiled, clearly pleased with her answer. The night went on without any major surprises until an older man, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit with an imposing posture, approached them. Nicholas, it's been a while, the man said, shaking Nicholas's hand firmly. Mr. Whitmore, Nicholas greeted him professionally. How have you been? Lucy observed the interaction, quickly realizing that this was someone important. Very well, very well. And who is this young lady? Nicholas placed his hand on Lucy's waist and introduced her casually. My girlfriend, Lucy. Lucy smiled and extended her hand. Nice to meet you. The man sized her up for a moment before shaking her hand. The pleasure is mine. So, Nicholas, when do you plan to bring Miss Cooper into the world of business? Lucy blinked a few times, surprised. Oh, She started to speak, but Nicholas was quicker. Soon, Mr. Whitmore. Lucy has a lot of talent and could be a great partner for future projects. Lucy tried to keep her expression neutral, but the surprise was still there. Nicholas had never mentioned anything about involving her in business, and now he was saying that in front of one of the most influential men at the event? Good to know, Mr. Whitmore said. We'll talk more about it another time. Nicholas nodded, and the man walked away, greeting other guests along the way. Lucy turned to Nicholas, narrowing her eyes. Can you explain what that was about? He gave a small smile. Just a little boost to the credibility of our relationship. You want me to pretend I know about business now? You don't need to pretend anything, he replied. But if you want a better job, this could be an opportunity. Lucy crossed her arms. I knew there was some catch to this deal. Relax, Nicholas said, grabbing another glass from a waiter's tray. You'll handle it just fine. Lucy was still suspicious, but decided to think about it later. For now, she just wanted to get through the night without any more surprises. However, the universe had other plans. Soon after, while they were walking through the hall, a waiter passed by offering appetizers. Lucy, distracted, grabbed one without looking closely. She only realized something was wrong when Nicholas grabbed her wrist just as she was about to take a bite. What's wrong? She asked, confused. Are you allergic to seafood? Lucy frowned. No. Why? Because you just picked up a shrimp canapé, and if you were allergic, this would be a really bad way to find out. She looked at the appetizer and then at him. Were you paying attention to what I grabbed to eat? Nicholas shrugged. You're my girlfriend. I'm supposed to care about those things. Lucy blinked, processing his response. That was unexpectedly thoughtful. He just gave a small smile. Don't get used to it. Lucy rolled her eyes, but couldn't help but smile a little. The rest of the night went by quickly, and soon they were in the car, on their way home. I think we passed the test tonight, Lucy said, letting out a long sigh. You were great. I know. Nicholas laughed. And modest too. Lucy smiled, looking out the window at the city passing by. Well, now that the whole media believes this story, what's the next step? Nicholas stayed silent for a moment before responding. Now, we need to keep convincing my family. Oh, great. More dinners with judgmental looks. Exactly, she sighed. If I survive this, I deserve a prize. You're already getting a prize, he replied. A month in my world. She glanced at him sideways. I'm still deciding whether that's a blessing or a curse. Nicholas smiled. You'll find out soon. Lucy shivered at his words because deep down she knew he was right. Something inside her told her that this deal was becoming more real than it should be. And that was exactly what scared her. Lucy woke up to the persistent buzzing of her phone, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. Her body was still exhausted from the night before, and the last thing she wanted was to deal with another wave of surprises. But when she saw Nicholas's name on the screen, she realized she had no choice. You know, there's something called appropriate hours to call someone, she said, answering with a sleepy voice. Good morning to you too, Nicholas replied, clearly already awake for hours. Got plans for today? Lucy frowned, still lying down. No. Why? Because we need to reinforce our credibility. Lucy sat up in bed, now fully awake. What exactly does that mean? Photos. She blinked. Yep. Now that we're officially on the media radar, we need to make sure we look like a real couple. Lucy scratched her head. You want us to be photographed together? Exactly. A casual outing, maybe a romantic lunch. Something that people will see and think, oh, they're really in love. Lucy sighed. You take this contract pretty seriously. And you should too. I'll be waiting for you in an hour. He hung up before she could argue. Lucy stared at the phone and then buried her face in the pillow. What did I do to deserve this? An hour later, Lucy came down from the apartment and found Nicholas leaning against a luxury car that looked like it came straight out of a commercial. He was wearing sunglasses and had a laid-back expression, as if he was just enjoying a normal day. "You act like you didn't drag someone into a faked date on short notice," Lucy muttered, getting in the car. "Consider it practice for future events," he said, starting the car. "Future events? You plan to drag me into more situations like this? You knew what you were getting yourself into." She crossed her arms. "I knew I'd have to pretend to be your girlfriend, but I didn't know it involved being chased by photographers. Welcome to my world." Lucy sighed and looked out the window while Nicholas drove through the city. Soon, they arrived at an elegant restaurant with a beautiful outdoor terrace perfect for being casually photographed. When they entered, Nicholas pulled the chair out for Lucy to sit before taking the seat across from her. "Look at you, a gentleman," Lucy joked. "Just keeping up appearances." She laughed and grabbed the menu, but noticed that Nicholas was no longer paying attention to it. "What's wrong?" He tilted his head slightly, subtly signaling with his eyes. Lucy followed his gaze and saw a group of photographers a few feet away, trying to look inconspicuous. "Are they already here?" she whispered. "Of course. I told you we needed to look convincing." Lucy rolled her eyes. "Does this mean I have to look all lovey-dovey while I eat?" "Exactly." She grabbed a piece of bread from the basket on the table and pointed at him. "You know this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever done, right?" "You've said that before, and I'll say it again." Nicholas just smiled, picked up a glass of wine, and raised it in a toast. "Here's to the perfect plan." Lucy raised her glass as well. "Perfect? I'd call it risky. And where's the fun without a little risk?" She shook her head but smiled. Even with all this craziness, she had to admit that she was having more fun than she should be. After lunch, Nicholas suggested a walk in the park, and Lucy noticed that the photographers followed them there. "Don't they ever get tired?" she murmured. "It's their job." Lucy sighed and decided to play along. When Nicholas took her hand, she didn't pull away. When he smiled at her, she smiled back. And when he leaned in to whisper something near her ear, probably just for the cameras, she laughed as if he had told the funniest thing in the world. "You're good at this," he said. "I'm an excellent actress." Nicholas gave a sideways smile. "Or maybe you're just having fun." She opened her mouth to reply but was interrupted by a familiar voice. "Well, this is interesting." Lucy turned around and felt her stomach churn when she saw Ryan standing there, watching her with a look of suspicion. "Ryan?" she exclaimed, surprised. He crossed his arms. "I thought it was weird seeing you with Nicholas Scott, but seeing this in person is even more unbelievable." Lucy tried to keep her composure. "What are you doing here?" "Taking a walk," he replied, still not taking his eyes off her. "And you? Playing the part?" Nicholas stayed silent next to her, just observing. Lucy crossed her arms. "Are you jealous?" Ryan let out a cynical laugh. "I just think all of this is very convenient." Lucy took a deep breath. "I don't owe you any explanations." Ryan looked at her for a moment before turning his attention back to Nicholas. "Are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into?" Nicholas smiled, but his eyes remained sharp. "I'm absolutely sure." Ryan frowned but didn't say anything else. He just shot one last look at Lucy before walking away. She let out a heavy sigh. "That was weird." Nicholas shoved his hands in his pockets. "He clearly hasn't gotten over it." Lucy rolled her eyes. "I haven't gotten over how much he embarrassed me either, but that doesn't mean I go around confronting people." Nicholas laughed. "You handled him well." "Thanks, but I'd prefer not to ever have to deal with him again." Nicholas smiled. "Well, with all this media attention, I think it's going to be hard for him to forget you anytime soon." Lucy sighed, feeling like he was right. The whole act was working better than expected, but at the same time, it was starting to feel more real. And Lucy wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a problem waiting to blow up. Because if there was one thing she was starting to realize, it was that the line between pretending and reality was getting dangerously thin. Lucy couldn't pinpoint exactly when everything started feeling more real than it should have. Maybe it was during dinner with Nicholas's family, when she found herself actually enjoying his mom's company for a few moments. Or maybe it was during the walk in the park, when Nicholas held her hand, and she didn't mind it that much. But now, sitting in the cafe, staring at her phone screen, and seeing yet another headline about the couple of the moment, Lucy began to realize what was really bothering her. She didn't feel like she was just pretending. "You're staring at that phone like it's going to bite you," Nicholas said, sitting across from her with 2 coffees in hand. Lucy grabbed hers, still staring at the screen. "It's just that," All of this still feels unreal. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, relaxed. You've said that before, and I'll keep saying it. You might be used to this kind of exposure, but I'm not. Nicholas took a sip of his coffee. You're handling it way better than I thought you would. Lucy sighed and rested her face in her hand. If I knew that one impulsive kiss would bring all this, maybe I would have run the other way. Nicholas gave a sideways smile. It wouldn't have been as fun. Lucy rolled her eyes but couldn't help a small smile. So now what? What's the next step? Nicholas went silent for a moment, as if thinking. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked directly at her. I want you to stay with me. Lucy blinked. Sure, the contract isn't over yet. I'm not talking about just the contract, she frowned. What do you mean? Nicholas took a deep breath. My dad's still suspicious. He wants more concrete proof that we're really together. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Nicholas hesitated for a moment before saying, I want you to move into my house. Lucy's eyes widened. What? It would be temporary, he explained quickly. Just enough for my family to see that we're taking this seriously. Lucy put the coffee down on the table before she accidentally spilled it. You want me to move into your house? This is crazy. Well, up until now, this whole thing has been crazy, Nicholas replied with a half smile. But this is on another level. Nicholas tilted his head slightly. Do you want the plan to work or not? Lucy opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. She knew Nicholas was right. If they wanted to keep up the act until the end, they needed to make it more believable. But living with him? That was too big of a step. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, biting her lip. Nicholas sighed. Look, I know it sounds like a lot, but think about it. You'll have your own space. You won't have to change anything in your routine. We just need to look like a couple living together for a while. Lucy took a deep breath. This still feels wrong. Nicholas crossed his arms and watched her for a moment. Then tell me, what's stopping you? She opened her mouth to respond, but realized she didn't exactly know what to say. Sure, this whole situation was insane, but did she really have a solid reason to say no? The worst part was that, no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise, a part of her was curious. What would it be like to spend more time with Nicholas? She sighed, exhausted. I need some time to think. Nicholas nodded. All right, but don't take too long. My dad is already planning to test us again. Lucy groaned and buried her face in her hands. I hate this contract. Nicholas laughed. Not more than I hate family dinners. She lifted her head and looked at him. So we're even then. Nicholas raised his cup as if making a toast. To our shared ruin. Lucy sighed and clinked her cup against his. To our shared ruin. The problem was, the more time she spent with Nicholas, the harder it became to remember that all of this was just an act. Lucy spent the next few days trying to decide whether or not to accept Nicholas's offer. She tried to think rationally. Moving into Nicholas's house for a while wouldn't be the end of the world. He had already assured her that she'd have her own space, and deep down, she knew the arrangement wouldn't last forever. But the doubt lingered. Could she keep the line between what was real and what was fake? That's when Nicholas invited her to dinner at his place that night, saying they needed to talk. Lucy agreed, and soon after the scheduled time, she was standing at the door of his apartment. He opened the door, wearing a button-up shirt with the first few buttons undone, which should be illegal because it made it hard for her to concentrate. Come in, he said, stepping aside to let her through. Lucy walked in and looked around. She'd been here before, but never really paid attention to the details. The apartment was huge, but somehow cozy. Nicholas walked to the kitchen and grabbed 2 wine glasses. Have you decided? He asked, handing one to her. Lucy took the glass and took a deep breath before answering. Yes, I'll move in temporarily. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. No emotional blackmail? No emotional blackmail, he smiled. You'll get used to it faster than you think. Lucy wasn't so sure about that, but she was about to find out. In the following days, she packed her things, and by the end of the week, she was officially living in Nicholas's house. The move wasn't as difficult as she expected, but living together? Well, that was another story. Nicholas was methodical. He liked schedules, routines, and didn't seem to know what instant coffee was because his coffee machine was more complicated than a NASA rocket manual. Lucy, on the other hand, liked strong, fast coffee, preferred not to have set times, and, to her utter dismay, discovered that Nicholas organized his clothes by color and type. On the first morning, when Lucy showed up in the kitchen wearing a baggy hoodie and messy hair, Nicholas just looked at her for a moment before saying, "I knew you had a laid-back style, but this is a whole new level." Lucy sat down and grabbed a toast. "I woke up. I'm dressed and ready to start the day. That's already a win." Nicholas laughed and sat down across from her. "Welcome to your new home, Lucy." She bit the toast and narrowed her eyes at him. "If I find a set of house rules taped to the fridge, I'm out of here." Nicholas raised his hands. "No rules. Just a few guidelines." Lucy sighed and grabbed her coffee. "This is going to be interesting." And just like that, without realizing it, Lucy took a step that would change everything. Because, as much as she told herself it was just a fake arrangement, living with Nicholas made that lie feel more and more real. Lucy never imagined she'd be living in a billionaire's house, let alone that this billionaire would be Nicholas Scott. In the first few days, she tried to stay as discreet as possible, avoiding any situation that would make living together feel even stranger than it already was. But she quickly realized it was impossible. First, because Nicholas was always around. He said he worked a lot and didn't spend much time at home, but oddly enough, he always seemed to have plenty of time to tease her. "Do you always leave your socks lying around like this?" he asked, crossing his arms and looking at Lucy's feet, which were comfortably bare on the sofa. "They're not scattered, they're artistically arranged," Lucy replied, not taking her eyes off the show she was watching. "Oh, I see. So modern art now includes socks thrown on the floor?" She grabbed a pillow and pretended to throw it at him. "You dragged me into this house. Now deal with the consequences." Nicholas laughed and sat down next to her. "I just expected a bit more sophistication." "You already knew me before hiring me, Nicholas. You should have known what you were getting into." He just smiled, and Lucy realized that their little back and forth was starting to feel strangely natural. And that was a problem. The biggest challenge of living together wasn't pretending to be a couple for everyone else. It was what Lucy started feeling when they were alone. Like that night, for example. They had been invited to a charity event hosted by the Scott family. It would be another one of those fancy gatherings where Lucy would need to smile and pretend she was part of that world. But this time, something felt different. She was finishing getting ready when she heard Nicholas call her name. "Lucy." She left the room and found him standing in the hallway, dressed in a sharp suit. He was holding something in his hands and seemed slightly hesitant. "What's up?" Nicholas walked over and handed her a small box. "For you." Lucy frowned and took the item, opening the lid slowly. Inside was a delicate necklace with a small, sparkling pendant. "What?" "I thought it would go well with your dress," he said casually. Lucy looked at him, suspicious. This wasn't part of the deal. "I know. Then why are you giving this to me?" Nicholas paused for a moment before answering. "Because I wanted to." Lucy felt a tightness in her chest. She wanted to believe this was just part of the act, that he was only trying to make everything more convincing. But something in the way he looked at her made it clear that it wasn't just that, and she didn't know what to do with that feeling. The charity event was a success. Nicholas and Lucy made their rounds, greeting influential people and posing for a few photos. Lucy was starting to get used to the curious stares and whispers around them. But what really surprised her was how Nicholas was by her side. This time, he wasn't just keeping up appearances. He held her hand without hesitation, laughed at her jokes effortlessly, and even adjusted her necklace at one point when he thought no one was looking. But Lucy saw. And that's when she realized the real problem. She was falling in love, but she couldn't. This was a contract, a lie, something that would end soon. So why didn't her heart seem to know that? When they got home that night, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with something Lucy couldn't define. She took off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. "I never want to wear high heels again in my life." Nicholas smiled and sat down next to her. "You did great today." "You always say that." "Because it's true." Lucy sighed and looked at him. "Nicholas." He turned his face to look at her, and in that moment, Lucy realized she was about to make a mistake. But she couldn't stop herself. "This is still just a contract, right?" Nicholas was quiet for a moment before answering. "Yes." But his look said otherwise. Lucy wanted to believe his answer. She wanted to convince herself that this was still just a game. But then, without warning, Nicholas lifted his hand and gently pushed a strand of hair from her face. It was a small gesture, simple, but enough to make Lucy's heart race. She needed to get out of there. "Good night, Nicholas," she said quickly, standing up and heading straight for the bedroom before she did something that would really complicate things. Because if she stayed one more second, she knew she wouldn't be able to resist. And she knew that, this time, there would be no way to pretend it wasn't real. Lucy spent the night awake. She tossed and turned in bed, trying to ignore the avalanche of thoughts flooding her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nicholas's face. The way he held her hand at the event. The way he adjusted her necklace around her neck without even realizing what he was doing. The intense look he gave her when he moved a strand of hair from her face. None of this should matter, but it did, and that was the problem. In the morning, when she finally decided to leave the bedroom, she found Nicholas in the kitchen. He was already dressed, having coffee, as if it were just another normal day. But for Lucy, it wasn't. She took a deep breath before speaking. "We need to talk." Nicholas raised an eyebrow and set his cup down on the table. "This sounds serious." "Because it is," Lucy said, crossing her arms. "The contract is ending." He was quiet for a moment, just watching her. "Yes. And after that, we go back to our normal lives?" Nicholas tilted his head slightly. "Is that what you want?" Lucy felt a lump in her throat. That was exactly the question she had been trying to avoid. The contract would end, she would go back to her life, and Nicholas would remain the unreachable billionaire he had always been. That's how it should be. So why did the idea of leaving make her chest ache? She forced a smile. Of course, that was the deal, right? Nicholas kept his gaze fixed on her. "If you say so." There was something in his tone that made Lucy hesitate. It was almost like he was waiting for her to say something else. But she couldn't. Because admitting she wanted more meant taking a risk. And Lucy had never been good with risks. The following days passed too quickly. Lucy tried to convince herself that everything was fine. She kept going through her routine, ignoring the tightness in her chest every time she thought about the day she would have to pack her bags and leave the house. Nicholas, on the other hand, seemed more distant. He was still kind, still doing his part perfectly. But there was a certain heaviness in the air. It was like they both knew something was about to change, but neither of them wanted to be the first to admit it. Then, the night before the contract ended, Nicholas finally broke the silence. "Have you packed your things?" Lucy looked at him from across the room. "Not yet." Nicholas nodded slowly, without saying anything. She wanted to ask him if he wanted her to stay. If this had all just been a game for him, or if, like her, he was also struggling with something that felt bigger than both of them. But instead, she just smiled and said, "I'll leave tomorrow morning." Nicholas nodded once more. "All right." The next morning, Lucy was finishing packing her suitcase when she heard a knock on the door. She took a deep breath before opening it. It was Nicholas. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, with an expression Lucy couldn't quite read. "Are you really leaving?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Lucy tried to smile, but she failed miserably. "That was the plan from the start, wasn't it?" Nicholas kept looking at her. "Plans change." Lucy felt her heart race. "Nicholas," he took a step forward. "Answer me this. If I asked you to stay, would you stay?" Lucy opened her mouth, but no words came out. This was it. The moment she had been avoiding since the second she realized this was no longer just a contract. She could simply say yes. She could admit that, at some point, this stopped being a facade for her. But what if Nicholas was only asking out of pride? What if, as soon as she said yes, he would realize he didn't want this after all? She couldn't risk it. So, forcing a smile, she answered, "Nicholas, don't make this harder than it already is." His eyes brightened for a second, but he just nodded slowly. "I understand." And without saying anything else, he left. Lucy closed her eyes, feeling a pain in her chest she didn't want to admit. She grabbed her suitcase, took a deep breath, and left. The following days were a blur. Lucy went back to her old routine, but nothing seemed right. Her apartment felt smaller. The coffee she used to love didn't taste the same anymore. And everything, absolutely everything, reminded her of Nicholas. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was normal. After all, they had spent so much time together. It was obvious it would take some time to get used to life without him. Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. Type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who made it this far will understand. Now, let's continue the story. But then, a week later, as she was passing by the window of a jewelry store at the mall, something caught her eye. The necklace. The same necklace Nicholas had given her that night before the charity event. She stopped and stared at the piece, feeling her heart tighten. And then she realized she had made a mistake. Lucy didn't waste any time. She took a taxi and went straight to Nicholas's house. The ride seemed longer than usual, and her heart was pounding in her chest. When she finally arrived, she took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Time seemed to drag until the door finally opened. Nicholas was there. The same intense look, the same controlled posture. But for a moment, Lucy saw surprise in his eyes. "Lucy? What are you doing here?" She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. But then she realized she didn't need a long speech. She just took a step forward, lifted her face, and kissed him. It was different from the first kiss. There was no desperation, no impulse. There was something real. When she pulled away, she looked at him and smiled. "I want to stay." For a moment, Nicholas didn't say anything. He just watched her, as if he wanted to make sure she was really there. And then finally he smiled. "Took you a while to realize that, huh?" Lucy laughed, feeling lighter for the first time in days. "You could have told me sooner. I was waiting for you to figure it out on your own." She crossed her arms. "What if I hadn't come?" Nicholas shrugged. "I would have come after you," Lucy smiled. "Really? Really? I never planned on falling for you, Lucy, but it happened." Her heart melted. "I'm glad it happened." And then, for the first time, they kissed without needing to pretend anything. Lucy never imagined her life would take this turn. She started this whole thing just trying to escape an awkward situation, and now she was completely in love with Nicholas Scott. The last few months with him had been a real whirlwind. Even without a contract forcing them to stay together, Lucy kept living with Nicholas. At first, she feared it was just a fleeting dream, but day by day she realized it wasn't. It was real. And to her total surprise, Nicholas seemed more and more comfortable with the idea of having her in his life. Of course, living together was still chaotic. Lucy still left her socks lying around the apartment, and Nicholas still organized the clothes by color, but somehow, it worked. She had never been so happy. But what she didn't know was that Nicholas had a plan. A big plan. And it involved a certain very shiny ring. It all started suspiciously. Nicholas started acting strange. He made mysterious phone calls, seemed lost in thought, and, on a few occasions, left without saying where he was going. Lucy tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just dealing with something at work. But after a week of suspicious behavior, she decided she needed to investigate. So she did the only logical thing. She followed Nicholas, with sunglasses and a huge coat, which definitely made her look more like a character from a comedy movie than a real spy. Lucy trailed him through the streets of New York, trying to figure out his secret, until he stopped at a jewelry store. Lucy almost had a mini heart attack. He was buying a ring? If it was an engagement ring, she might have had to pretend to faint just to have time to process the information. But Nicholas didn't go into the store. He just talked to someone at the door and then left. Lucy, now too curious to back off, decided to go in. The saleswoman greeted her with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" Lucy smiled nervously. "Yes, a tall, handsome, and somewhat methodical man just walked by. Was he buying something?" The saleswoman blinked a few times. "You mean Nicholas Scott?" Lucy forced a smile. "Yeah, that's him." The woman laughed. "He was arranging something special." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "Something special, like really special?" The saleswoman smiled mysteriously. "You'll see soon." Lucy left the store with sweaty palms and a racing heart. Now all she had to do was wait. The following weekend, Nicholas invited her to a special dinner. Lucy was already suspicious. So, when he took her to an insanely fancy restaurant with a view of the entire city, she knew something was about to happen. And it did. After dinner, Nicholas took her to the building's rooftop. The night breeze was gently blowing and the city lights sparkled below them. Lucy looked around, feeling emotional at the view. "This is beautiful, Nicholas." He smiled. "Not as beautiful as you." Lucy blinked. "Wow, that was unexpectedly romantic. I have a few more surprises for you." Before she could ask what he meant, Nicholas knelt down. Lucy froze. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure she was about to faint. Nicholas pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a stunning ring. Lucy brought her hands to her face. "Oh my God," Nicholas smiled. "Lucy Cooper, I never planned on falling for you, but it happened. You messed up my routine, made me laugh when I didn't want to, and showed me that life can be fun even when it feels like chaos." Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears. That was unexpectedly sweet. He laughed. "So my messy and adorable Lucy, will you marry me?" Lucy was so emotional she forgot how to breathe. But as always, her instinct was to make the moment unique. So instead of responding traditionally, she pretended to be deep in thought. I don't know. Are you ready for a future where your clothes will never be perfectly organized by color again?" Nicholas raised an eyebrow. I've already accepted that reality. And where my collection of socks scattered around the apartment will continue to grow uncontrollably, it'll be a challenge, but I accept it. Lucy laughed, wiping away a tear. Then I guess I have no choice. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Does that mean yes? She smiled. Yes. He stood up, picked her up in his arms, and spun her around before kissing her. And it was right there, in that moment, that Lucy realized that kiss was completely different from the first one. This time, there were no more doubts. They were real. The wedding was a true spectacle. The ceremony took place outdoors, in a charming garden decorated with white flowers and twinkling lights. Nicholas, in a perfectly tailored suit, waited for Walter with a smile that made Lucy's heart melt. She walked down the aisle to the sound of soft music, feeling like this was the most beautiful moment of her life. When she finally reached the altar, Nicholas took her hand. "You look beautiful," Lucy smiled. "You're not so bad yourself." The vows were emotional. Nicholas talked about how he never imagined an unexpected kiss would change his life. Lucy talked about how he taught her that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. And then finally, they said, "I do." When Nicholas kissed her this time, Lucy knew there was no longer a contract, a plan, or an agreement. There was only them, together, forever. What did you think of Lucy and Nicholas' story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to follow all our stories, and feel free to watch more emotional stories by clicking here on the final screen.